Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of SuperCoach Mates. Well, for those of us that play SuperCoach, our 2025 arrived early last Wednesday when we finally got the prices and the team picker for those of us who are subscribed to SuperCoach Gold or Herald Sun Plus or Code Sports. So I guess for those of us who are doing SuperCoach in 2025, most of us have probably been having a look at prices and, sort of some bargain buys and whatnot. So what we're going to do today is we're just going to sort of give an overview of each position and perhaps some of the bargain players who we think you should consider. And we're going to provide Thomas is going to provide a sort of an early draft of how his side's looking. And I might start looking at perhaps some draft tips and whatnot. So as per normal, I am joined by Thomas. How are you going, Thomas?
Yeah, not too bad. Glad the Christmas season is coming early, and interested to see what holds for this team picker. I know it got released last week, so I've had a bit of a tinker with regards to how it looks like. Definitely a lot of interesting discussion points to be had with regards to this things like flex position and things like that, where it'll be interesting because it'll be different to previous seasons where we essentially have an additional position to play, and like similar to the BBL SuperCoach where they've got that flex position in this season, it'll make it different to how you pick your premiums and what you do with that flex position, because there's probably different ways you can do it as it's the first time for the AFL SuperCoach. But we won't hold you guys a breath any longer, but I've basically got a blank canvas here. I've taken a screenshot earlier of the team I put together basically a couple of days ago, and we'll go through position by position to see how it differs to what Nathan's thoughts are. And as Nathan said, he's quite draft specific. He'll put in some draft gems as well for you guys if you guys are playing draft this year. But first of all, as we have the premiums, first I've got Harry Sheasel in there. I think he picks himself to some degree. There was some conversation around whether it was between him and Sam Flanders. I think at this point I'm picking Sheasel ahead of Flanders. The only reason being is Flanders played that halfback role quite substantially last season, which made an uptick in his scoring. And I think with the guys of Rioli and Noble in the team, I don't know how heavily that impacts Flanders' role, whether that means Flanders ends up playing more as a third midfielder alongside Anderson and Rowell, and how that impacts his scoring a little bit. And Sheasel has scored quite nicely regardless of where he's played. But that's, pretty much sold. The next person I've got in is Jack Sinclair. I'll elaborate on him a little bit later, but I know Nathan's smiling. But I think with the addition of Travalia, that potentially might allow a bit of freedom for Sinclair to play that halfback role a bit more consistently. I think the likes of Nazai Wang and Miller might end up playing more predominantly in the midfield, is my guess. Out of the two, I as a St Kilda supporter anyway, I'd like to see Sinclair as a main kick taker from that team. And with a lot of games at Marvel as well, early days, that could help. Third off the list, Dan Houston. He's one that I've ummanad with his price tag as well, and some potential other guys. But I guess Nathan can elaborate a bit further. It seems like he's playing more in the halfback role or training in the defensive line with the Pies at the moment. Whether that changes into more of a midfield role is yet to be seen. I think if he plays midfield, that changes. But I think I'm pretty happy with him playing. If he plays in the back line, I can see him being the main kick taker for the Pies out there. I don't think they really had one to start with. But that's one that I'm pretty confident on. The next one is, if I just type his name in, Callum Mills is the fourth on the list. I think he's got a discounted price. Yet to be seen what he's going to do early days with a long stint from injury, but at his price and how desperate Sydney needed him probably last season, and him playing more of a hybrid mid-defensive role. I think when he was fit, he pretty much played midfield, and then when they needed him in defence, they threw him as an extra man down back, which is pretty SuperCoach friendly. Very contested, heavy numbers, and if he can stay fit the whole preseason, I don't see why not you put him in there. The next person, which I initially had as my flex player, but I guess it doesn't really matter where you're playing, but Kitty Coleman, Was elite ball user down half back. If he can get his body right, I don't see why that price is very good for him. I guess the big risk is his injury. You can easily bump him down to a rookie and actually have another 100k in the bank. But yeah, he's one that I think if he can stay fit, him and Dane Zorko could dominate the halfback flanks next season. And it was really important to see how the Lions utilised Zorko last season at halfback, and I think they can utilise Kitty Coleman in a similar vein. And then the rookies, I'll be quick with these ones before Nathan has his say. But yeah, Chubby Travaglia, I think he has an early game in there. I've listened to some interviews from the Saints websites. It seems like potentially a halfback wing role is where he might start, moving into an inside mid, possibly not next season, but in future years. But yeah, very probably a similar vein to Darcy Wilson, starting on at wing, pushing to halfback is quite a friendly SuperCoach role. And that's what I mean in saying that if Travaglia locks up a halfback role, there's room in the midfield for someone like a Wangane Miller or as I said, maybe a Sinclair to push into the mids. But yeah, Travaglia, I think, gets an on-field spot. And then the rookies, obviously, these will change once we get more data. But Bo Allen probably gets early games anyway. And the Eagles, I'll play a lot of kids early, I think, and he's an elite ball user, elite inside midfielder ball user from Victoria, so I think he'll do quite nicely. And then Riley Bice, sorry, from the Swans. I haven't heard much of him. We obviously didn't speak much of him in our draft kind of profile, but it seemed to me from what I've seen online is they're really excited about his ball use off halfback. So whether or not he gets an early game, but he seems like a Jake Lloyd type from his profile, just visually speaking as well. And I could see him doing quite nicely if he plays that halfback role. But they've also got a lot of other players down there as well. But yeah, he's a rookie holder for that. So what are your thoughts, Nathan, initially? And what are your changes, or what are your kind of initial thoughts off that first six or first 8 players?
Yeah, well, I'll just start. So when I did my first team, I actually had Flanders and Sheasel both in there.
Mm-hmm.
I just feel like that Flanders is only going to get better. But then there is that impact of Rioli and Noble, which I'll admit I actually forgot about that until you mentioned that. So perhaps I might need to retinker with that. Sheasel, I think Sheasel picks himself. The one I don't mind a little bit cheaper than that, James Sicily. I feel like with the addition of Josh Battle and Tom Barris at Hawthorn, I feel like he can really just become that intercept player who can just take marks for days. I also had Kitty Coleman in my sort of starting one, but I mean, there are obviously just looking at this from a draft perspective. Obviously, with draft, the prices don't really matter as much, and it is sort of more based on how players are going and whatnot. So, yeah, I suppose with draft at this stage, there probably isn't too much to report on, other than to just keep your eye on those players who are injured, and perhaps have a look at some players who are having potential position changes, especially for the back line if they're moving into the midfield, just for bumping their scoring. But for classic wise, I guess at this time of the year, it's probably always, I guess, good to look at some bargain picks. Like I would say, I actually forgot about Cullen Mills as well. I didn't realize he was 357,000 for classic, so he might find his way in there. But yeah, there's always a good few players who I think at this time of the year, might come into contention, especially those who are coming off injuries. But I guess they're that price for a reason, because they obviously have been injured. So there is a bit of a risk there with, I guess, picking players who are a bit cheaper just for that reason, because they're at that price for a reason. But yeah, I think the gist of my sort of the way that I picked my team, which unfortunately I don't think I can show you guys, but it's basically the same as what Thomas has got on screen here. Obviously the rookies, I'm not really too bothered by the rookies yet. It's more about the the structure and whatnot. So yeah, at the minute I've got Flanders, Sheasel, Sicily, and Kitty Coleman as my sort of higher price guys, but I might try and squeeze Cullen Mills into that if I can as well. Because I think he is underpriced for his output. And although he's coming back from injury, it's not an ACL injury, which generally means I believe once you sort of have your shoulders fixed, the recurrence rate isn't as high as say doing an ACL again. So I think he might squeeze his way in there. But other than that, yeah, there's not really the one. Tom Dode perhaps or Dude could be a bit of an interest depending on his role at Brisbane. But other than that, I think the defenders are basically either the higher price ones, probably Mills and Coleman, and then you're probably down into the 170 odd K and under. So I think the back line sort of might pick itself a bit this year, a bit easier than other years. So that's just my thoughts on the back line at first glance.
Yeah. Did you say that Coleman had a shoulder? Because I'm pretty sure it was an ACL in March.
No, that was Mills with
Oh,
the
Mills.
shoulder.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, Coleman.
Yeah,
ACL,
Mills with the shoulder.
Yeah. So as Nathan said, I think you're probably a bit more confident picking Mills than Coleman. Coleman's got that risk of re-rupture. I mean, obviously we don't wish anyone, but yeah, Coleman.
There is a higher chance.
There is a higher chance there. Yeah, Nathan's completely correct. And then Mills, I'm pretty sure he was pretty fit to go come grand final day, and they made that line ball call whether or not to play him, and probably needed him out there last year versus Brisbane. So yeah, Mills is. I'd be definitely raring to go and seeking some sort of revenge after missing that final series. But moving forward to the midfield 8 plus 3 bench players, this is seen a couple different ways people have decided to select their teams with this. Obviously, it really depends on how many premiums you want to go. There's some value players there as well, and a ton of rookies that you can pick from this year, especially the ones that are quite heightened in price with how stacked that midfield mix is. But first off the tab there, Bontempelli, I think, picks himself 2 years ago. I think let me just get this right. I didn't select him and probably paid the price not starting him. This season I did, reap the benefits. Just seems to get easy tons for fun and can score very quickly. I think he's a no-brainer. The next person, Nathan, have been me saying this, Nick Dacos. I think he can leverage his game up even higher next season. Just has a knack of finding the ball. He was obviously defender last year. I don't think that changes anything when he plays as a pure mid this year in SuperCoach. I think, teams struggle to just tag him if they decide to when his floor is really high as well. So there's those poor scores get really nullified quite quickly. Third in line's probably the most controversial pick and something that I'm not actually that confident with. I'm interested to see what Nathan saw. It says Andy Brayshaw. There's talk that he can really get his game up to the next level. I had Sarong for the majority of last year, and the reason I didn't like Sarong was the fact that he just needed about 45 touches to score 100. He just has a very happy handball-friendly game, and Brayshaw is kind of the other counterpart to that Freo midfield, and he kind of gets a lot of free points off his contested pressure, his tackle numbers. And if you just look at his scores from, let me just bring this up quickly. I had it on screen beforehand. His scores in the back end of the season were quite impressive. So from round 17 to 24, he only dropped under a sub-ton once. And then, so it was 128, 100, 137 three times in a row. Then a 77 in round 22, and then a 147, 127. Before that, he was probably not as consistent. But even then, before that, he only had 5 sub-tons. So, yeah, very impressive player. I think went under the radar a fair bit with the likes of Sarong and Merritt as well. I think he's the one that, particularly how Fremantle is structured up this year in the draft, and the trade period, getting a Shy Bolton as well can really help them, and they're probably a finals threat come next year. But he's one that I'm also happy to let go of for a cheaper midfielder if I need to upgrade elsewhere come next season, because I think he's one that just the way he plays won't consistently get your 130s so often that his price is going to go skyrocketing. But a sub 500 Andy Brayshaw is not too bad. But moving on to pick number 4. So the next one in line is Clary Oliver. So he's another controversial one that really didn't set the house on fire last year at all, and people picked him at cheaper prices and stuff like that and were not rewarded at all. But I think he's got a point to prove this season or next season. Sorry, if you can get his body right 100%, there's no hiccups in his preseason. I don't see why he can dominate games again. I think Melbourne have a massive point to prove come 2025, and that was super disappointing last season. So if they can get their full, build their health on track, I think Oliver and Petrarca are 2 players that are going to really dominate games. But I think Oliver's one that if he doesn't dominate in preseason, just get rid of him straight away, because I think, there were some doubts upon whether he moves to someone like Geelong and didn't get that trade through. So if he doesn't quite get there, I think he's one that I'm happy to get rid of straight away. And there's probably ways around that. You got like Will Ashcroft as well, who showed in the grand final, got the Norman Smith medal. He's priced cheaper than Oliver, so he's one that can easily go there. I guess the only issue is the buys, but yeah, that's a very easy position to flick out of. But yeah, the rookies basically fill out the rest of that midfield side. So Jagger Smith, reports are he's training quite well at Carlton. I can see him playing quite early days. He's an accumulator. I think it's what Carlton needs to help that midfield. Then I've got Sid Draper in there from the Crows, apparently dominating a lot of the time trials and sprints and run-throughs. Big body midfielder, especially with Peatling. Peatling coming across as well helps the other midfielders as well with that defensive grunt. I think Sid Draper can get a bit of help down that side and could score quite nicely come round 1. I think he's one to keep an eye on. Obviously, these will change come pre-season. Next one in line is Harvey Langford from the D's. I think he pretty much fills out that number 3 midfielder for the D's. I think their rotation will pretty much be himself, Viney, Petrarca and Oliver, and maybe another 5th midfielder. But I could see him doing quite nicely in there. Reminds me a bit of Tom Green in the way he goes about things. So, obviously he's quite expensive. I don't realistically potentially could go cheaper with one of those 3 mids with Ashcroft later on. But yeah, I think he's one that potentially will score quite well if he gets a chance early. And then this guy here, Saad El Hali, apparently playing off halfback for the Dons. I think he's a lock regardless of where you put him. I've put him in the midfield for that defensive mid eligibility kind of flick through, but I think he should be in everyone's sides early days at least until we see him pre-season. But apparently he's doing quite nicely off halfback, and was only injury that stopped him from playing. And then the other midfield bench, really this one's just filling it out at the moment. But Dev Robertson, a cheap midfielder, could get games with the likes of, Dano retiring. Neil Erasmus apparently scored very nicely in the Waffle final series. Whether he gets a spot in the team is yet to be seen, but there's not many other bench players you can fill out here. And Christian Moraes, I'm pretty sure that's his name. I've heard pretty good things. I'm pretty sure it's him. Off Port playing that mid-forward kind of hybrid role. If he gets early games, I think any of those young Port mids can score pretty nicely to start off with as a bit of a slow cash burn. But what are your thoughts on the midfield, and how do you think you'll structure up with the midfield? Do you reckon more of a guns rookies approach, or taking more risk in that midfield spot with, rookies?
Yeah, this is mid-pros mayhem here in the midfield, as it always is. I was just having a bit of a flick through it, but somehow we've actually managed to get Oliver at M4, both of us. So I feel like I'm probably okay with that. So I've got Bont as well. I've got Butters. I've got Dacos. I've got Clary as well. I feel like he's in for a big year. He'd probably even be someone I would say lock him in for draft as well if he gets through pre-season. Because I think you've got to remember sort of how much of an impact pre-season training does have on players, and he basically didn't have a preseason last year. So if he's fit and firing, there's no reason why he can't do, get himself back up into that upper echelon. And then I'm basically all the way down to rookies as well. So I've got Finn O'Sullivan from North Melbourne. I think he will get guaranteed games. And then the only other rookie who I've picked at this stage is Levi Ashcroft, who I think just walks straight into that Brisbane side, and probably, at least on paper, improves them from their premiership winning side last year. But there were a few little, I guess, surprises and perhaps players who I personally would avoid, just given their price. So Lockie Neal, I feel like he's probably about 30 or 40k overpriced. I feel like you'll be able to get him probably cheaper at some stage. Heaney's another one. Started the year like a house on fire, but then fell away really badly last year. So I think as a mid only, I think you can probably cross him off, at least for now. Sarong, again, as Thomas mentioned, I feel like, he started off well as well, but I think once sort of Fremantle went away from that chip mark game and more towards the his scoring sort of started suffering a bit. So I don't know about him. Patrick Cripps, for those of you who didn't watch the last podcast, I said to avoid him because generally speaking, Brownlow medalists don't back up the year after, and I went off camera and had a look afterwards. And after his Brownlow in 2022, he only averaged about 90 for the 2023 season. So that's a bit of a red flag there. But otherwise, I feel like pretty much any other midfielder in that list, I'd be comfortable picking sort of above, say, that Errol Gordon price of 581. I feel like all the other ones in there, you could probably rotate between them. But yeah, as I said, I probably will avoid Heaney, Sarong, and Cripps and Neil just for the reasons I outlined. But I think all the other 12 midfielders, I think you could probably comfortably pick in there. And there is the Oliver dangle in that if he doesn't perform, I guess you can always put him up to someone else, or as Thomas touched on, Will Ashcroft is only 10k cheaper than Oliver, so that could be another option. But yeah, there is, I guess, the risk of midfield, mid-price madness in here. Like Riley Sanders is someone who I think could improve massively. Ollie Hollands is someone who I think could push with more midfield minutes. There's someone else who I saw, Mateus Philippou, someone who I think could rise up and push up. Isaac Cumming, really awkwardly priced, but at a new club, I wonder what his role's going to be. Cam Guthrie, proven scorer, but just can't get his body right. He's relatively cheap. And then you're sort of moving down into the the high price rookies here, like Dom Sheed, again, proven scorer, sort of, but massively underpriced. And then you're sort of down in the rookies with like Sam Layler and Jager Smith. So yeah, there is a bit of a risk of running mid-price madness, but I think for mine, if you're doing classic, I think it's basically just pick your 3 or 4 big guns, perhaps look at a mid-pricer and then just go down to the rookies, because I don't think it's worth picking up a lot of mid-prices, because as I touched on in the back line, they're priced at that for a reason, so there is the risk with picking them. But yeah, that's sort of my thoughts on the midfielders. I think just pick, your 3 or 4 big guys, perhaps have a look at, Oliver, if you can fit him in, and then I would just go straight down to those, Finn O'Sullivan and, Sam Layla type rookies, because I just don't think there's anyone in that sort of mid-price range who's going to jump up.
Yeah, no, I do agree with you in that front. I guess the risk with regards to picking too many mid-prices, you end up getting yourself priced out a little bit of upgrade kind of cycle. And if they don't score like a house on fire or manage to equalise with the premiums, it makes it quite tricky. Like I had that issue last season where I had to basically force myself to trade or waste a few trades essentially to get Ollie Wines out as well. So having two, I think it was Ollie Wines and Matt Crouch, and I think I ended up getting rid of both and probably should have held on Matt Crouch a little bit longer. But yeah, it was a little bit frustrating in that regards to trade out of those ones. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens. I think if you can get yourself some loaded premiums to start with, that's going to be definitely handy. I actually need to go to the toilet really quickly. So what I'll do is I will explain those rookies, the rucks, and let Nathan ramble on a little bit whilst I go to the loo. But quickly, Tristan Sherry is my first one off the cap here. So he's number one. I guess he's a bit pricier than to start with. But I guess, you're paying for what he's capable of, and what he's capable of was pretty much the best ruckman going around. Scored for fun. I think his score will only improve with their midfield improvement come next season. But he's one that, I guess, look at his average, almost 120. So you're pretty much paying premium midfield numbers for what he's capable of. Second one, I'll talk when I come back, but Ron Marshall was initially him, but it's now Tom DeConning from the Blues, just because of the price and the rumours going around that Marshall's playing more forward because of our signing of Harry Boyd from the Sandful. So yeah, DeCon, if he can stay fit, I think he's one that has showed he's capable of showing premium numbers. But I'll be back in a minute and let Nathan talk about the ruck line.
Yeah, well, I've actually got Tristan Cherry in my R1 as well. I just think North Melbourne, if there's one position or one part of the ground they've got going for them, it is their midfield. And I feel like Tristan Cherry is the one who really benefits from that. When you're tapping the ball down to the likes of, LDU and Sheasel and Colby McKercher when he moves in there, and now they've added Finn O'Sullivan as well. It really does make that pick sort of pick itself. And my second one, I've got Jared Witts as my second one, who I feel like, is a bit probably 20 or 30K cheaper than where his output can be. I only played the 16 games last year, and when he didn't play, Gold Coast really did, I guess, suffer in their midfield without him. So I think he's really important to the way that the Suns play, and he gets that clearance game going for them. But yeah, there are a few sort of others on here. Max Gawn, I'm not sure about Max Gawn. I probably wouldn't be picking him. I just don't know how Melbourne are going to go, and also I think he fractured his larynx, which is the thing up here in your throat, which is quite painful. So I don't know if I would be picking Gawn. And then you're sort of down into the, Rowan Marshall category. We've just heard Thomas mention about him playing forward. Nan Curvis is probably just about Richmond's best player now. So I probably wouldn't have any problems picking him. And the way that Adam Uze plays, coming from that Melbourne background, is that, they are sort of a bit more of a clearance team, which probably will help Nan Curvis. Tim English, I think, is underpriced for what he can do, but I guess there's the Western Bulldogs and the Luke Beveridge factor. I know there were times in 2024 where he's contemplating getting dropped, which is just amazing. Grundy for me is a no. Darcy Cameron for me, even though I'm a Collingwood supporter and I love watching him play, I think he's basically at the top of his output. And then, you're sort of down into the Lloyd Meek and Tom DeConning, who at 547,000, I don't mind that price of Tom DeConning. And then, you've got Sean Darcy at 529. If he can get his body right, that's the steal at 529. And then, yeah, you're sort of moving down into, you know, the backup ruckmans, if you will. So, yeah, I think I'm happy with my Tristan Cherry and Jared Witts combo at this stage. But, yeah, there is always that option, I guess, to save probably the 40K and go down to a DeConning or, you know, it's Sean Darcy. But, yeah, at this stage, I think I'm happy with Tristan Cherry and Jared Witts as the two ruckmen.
Yeah, which will be definitely a pod for you. I don't think wouldn't be surprised if he's not highly owned at all. And we all know how consistent he can be. But yeah, interesting to see what happens, because if you remove DeConning for a minute and then get back to the top price rocks, they do spike up in price quite significantly. I think Max Gorn, you know, if you can somehow facilitate that, he still averages 124 points a game. So
I said no to Max Gorn, by the
yeah.
way.
Oh yeah, it's understandable.
I just don't know how Melbourne are going to go, and also I think he fractured his larynx the other day, which is
he had that freak train injury. So
the bit down your throat here,
Yeah.
so which is quite painful. So, yeah, we'll see how that goes.
But I think at the end of the day, like logistically speaking, I've tried to get Maxi in, and having two 600 plus rucks is quite expensive. It kind of prices you out elsewhere. Yeah, as I said, Rowan Marshall, I had him in my team last year and was pretty frustrated that kind of backfired when I got rid of him, because I'm pretty sure it was a game against Port Adelaide where he started really slowly and then got semi-injured. So he went off for a fair bit and just never really recovered. And I thought, you know, shit, that's him done for a couple of weeks at least. And then basically didn't miss a game and went back to his scoring hundreds. I think the risk with Marshall, as I just said before I had to pop off, was we signed Harry Boyd from the Sandful, and it seems like we're playing. This is obviously pre-Christmas, pre-season and whatnot, so yet to be seen exactly what we do with the ruck kind of division. But it seems like Ross Lyon might be more confident in playing Marshall up forward, more as not as a key forward, but basically starting Boyd in the ruck at times. And I think that's going to impact his scoring a little bit, SuperCoach wise. It seems to help us structurally forward. We like to have Marshall up forward a fair bit. Going back to, you know, your 2020 years when Paddy Ryder was there as that kind of hybrid ruck forward, and it seems like Marshall, you know, started out as a forward when he was a rookie, so going back to what he knows best in some regards. But playing Boyd and Marshall in tandem ruck could impact his scoring, particularly from a SuperCoach perspective. And as I just heard you as I came back, yeah, English, I think, you know, there's really question marks around what he's capable of. He's sub 600K, so I guess, you know, if you wanted to pick him, you can pick him. I think he really struggled with that new ruck rule this year, where essentially the bigger rucks can basically stick an arm, fend off and stop without having a free kick paid against them. But I think if you look at the prices, so Sean Darcy's really the only one that probably entices me at that low 500K if I'm not going to Conning. Lloyd Meek, I got him in as a cheapie last year. I don't think he's capable of maintaining bigger numbers. And DeConning's the one that, if you just look at his numbers when he was playing ruck, he scored big numbers. So from round 11 to 17, he injured himself once, but 131, 140, 146, 176, 128, 95, 77. So, you know, there's obviously the risk of Pitney, but if they see DeConning as that sole rock, I don't see why not. You can go a bit riskier in that role and get a few price rises out of him before maybe trying to facilitate a trade up to Max Gorn or something like that if Max Gorn decides to really dominate games, as he so often does. But just obviously, as before we move on to the forward lines, just filling out the bench. Yeah, someone like a ruck forward I think is really important to have in your side. Obviously, with SuperCoach this year, with regards to the flex rule, they have that sub 100K rookie, so you can save a bit more money there. But I think it is quite important to just have a ruck forward swing that plays Sunday games, just so you know you have that ability to as a basically a permanent loop. The other only option I'm probably entertaining for money is if and when Harry Boyd does get entered into the game, and wouldn't be surprised if he starts at kind of that similar price range. And if he does, then I guess you probably might want to rejig certain things, because if he plays as a number one ruck for at least a couple games, could score quite nicely, just as a real cheap rookie. But moving on to the forward line. Oh, yeah.
Just before I move to the forward line as well, please don't fall into the trap of picking a mid-price ruckman. They will burn you.
Yeah.
Unless they are playing every single game consistently in the ruck, then just completely avoid any mid-price ruckman. They will absolutely burn you. So yeah, you're better off if there's one position where we recommend picking the two big guys, or avoiding rookies, it is definitely in the ruck line. Personally, I think you should just set and forget. Unless there is a really clear standout, mid-price ruck. But otherwise, most of the time you're better off just picking two ruckmen who are just set and forget, and just playing them throughout the year, because you can just spend your trades elsewhere. Sorry to butt in there.
No, 100% agree. And I think Nathan brings up a really important point, especially for new super coaches who, you open up the app come January or whatever now, you're a SuperCoach Gold member, and are not really familiar with how some scoring works. Yeah, it looks nice on paper when you have your mid-price rucks and you go, oh, sweet, they'll score okay and they'll make some money, but they can really burn you if you need an extra 200k to try and upgrade to a Tristan's area or a Max Scorn, and then really struggle to get there. And that's kind of the same mantra in some sense for upgrading and downgrading midfielders as well. And that's what I was alluding to before I had to pop off beforehand with regards to midfielders, where I had Matt Crouch and Ollie Wines last year. I kept Ollie Wines 1 week longer than Matt Crouch, eventually got rid of both of them, but it really burnt me probably 4 to 5 trades in total just to go one up, one down on both, because I wasn't just quite able to go straight up from both of them to your top tier midfielders. So I think at the end of the day, those rookies, as long as they're playing and as long as they're not complete spuds, are going to help your cash generation eventually, as long as you're patient and are willing to, wait until they really max out. And as long as you watch enough games of them playing during the home and away season, I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind. But moving on to the forward line, this can be a little bit different, I guess, in some regards, because, you'll see my team in a minute. There's one out and out premium. I've seen teams without a premium at all. And I guess this goes away from what we've just spoken about altogether. But it's a little bit different, I think, in the terms of the forward line, where there's no standout premiums. There hasn't been for about a season now where you can confidently say that this player is going to average over 100. With the forward lines, you're pretty much happy to accept 100 average, realistically speaking. I think Heaney was really the only one that did that on a consistent basis. But this year in particular, I guess the reason why it helps maintain the structure in the mids and the defence is because of the mid-price madness in the forward line. I'd be interested to see what you think, Nathan, as well, when you come to your side and how that differs. But moving off the first cap of the rank is Jason Horne-Francis is eligible as a forward this year at 537. So he's quite expensive for someone that didn't average 100. But I think he's just capable of winning games for Port, and will get more and more important as the years go on, and kind of unleashing him as that full-time midfielder. Has the ability to play forward as well. I think they like him in the midfield rotation as well. There are times where, as a Butters owner last year, I was very frustrated with how they were structuring up with Horne-Francis as that first or second mid. I think as he matures, he becomes a prime, Dangerfield-esque player. Second off the back is McRae. A lot of people have said or have gone against him in some sense because I think he's past his best. I think, and we spoke about this in our season kind of recap of 2024. Look, I think there was a reason why we got him. He's an inside midfielder. He's extremely clean. And you just look at his VFL numbers. They're insane. Last season when he wasn't playing in the AFL, granted that's a VFL, it's a different competition altogether, but he wasn't given the opportunities at the Dogs, and you just have to look at some of where those players are playing at the time to just see how unsettled that midfield mix was. And I think McRae was just pushed out of it. Granted, he probably might have been past his best, but I think he provides a real leadership role in there, and I think will rack up quite nice numbers in general terms when he's playing midfield role for St Kilda. Number 3, which is probably the least confident I am in picking someone, is Bailey Smith. And the reason I say that is he's coming off an ACL. We don't exactly know where he's going to play for the Cats, but a sub 400k Bailey Smith in the forward line is pretty good news. I think he's one that if he doesn't do well to start off with, I think you can pretty punt him quite successfully. But if he plays midfield, he's going to score eventually. The Cats don't have too many standout SuperCoach players. I think Holmes is the main one there and Stewart. But Smith, I think, can get his fair share of points. I want the ball in his hands with his explosiveness. And they can see that they were doing that with Max Holmes as well. And to round off the last 3, I'll keep this one pretty brief just because they're on the cheaper end of things. Philippou is my next in line. Pretty much playing a midfield role at St Kilda at the moment, or training with the mids. He's primed to explode, I think. Back end of last year's season, when playing midfield, dominated and is capable of scoring big hundreds, which is a nice thing. There is probably some susceptibility to a tag next season when he does play more consistently in the mid, because he seems our most dangerous ball user with that capability of pushing forward. But it's one to be, seen for next season. Caleb Daniels, my F5. I think he should be locking anyone's team. He's locked up that halfback role for North. He's a better ball user than the likes of Zach Fisher and Tom Powell and the like that were playing there last season. And I think everyone should have him inside with that price tag because we all know what he's capable of. And then as a rookie to finish off, Elijah Hewitt, as that forward mid hybrid, I think he'll probably, get games and score okay-ish. The Eagles are on the up in some degree with the youngsters they're kind of building or rebuilding together. So there'll be a fair few rookies to pick from. And then, look, there's not really many good forward rookies, but I think it's Ashton Muir. Yeah. From the Blues, played 2 games last year. Look, if he plays, he plays. It's not really an important thing. And another name I put in there, this is more of a St Kilda bias, but James Barrett, if he does play and doesn't play a key pillar down back, could potentially score okay and as a defensive forward swing. So very handy SuperCoach positional-wise, but yet to be seen. Obviously, he'll be first to go if he doesn't get a game. But with Josh Battle out and Alex Toru being more of a long-term prospect as that high-end rookie, I think Barrett, just with his size and maturity levels, he seems... Looking at first glance, he seems like a 26-year-old in an 18-year-old's body. Could do quite nicely, potentially as a short-term battle replacement if he does get early games. But as I said, he's just a rookie holder. And the most important news that you'll be waiting for is the flex role. At the moment, obviously, you can see I've only got 189,000 left in the kitty with this team set up. And the person I've decided to give that flex role to is Levi Ashcroft, if I can get it there. Reason being is because, and I'm interested to see what Nathan says with his thoughts, but I've seen a lot of players use this as an extra ruck, a cheaper ruck, a cheaper mid, like a 440k mid. But Ashcroft, I think, will turn into potentially another premium ruck. I think using it as a third ruck is quite important. The main reason being now you've got that luxury of, if a ruck goes down for a week or 2, you can flip in that flex player straight away and not have a concern that you're gonna cop a 0 with your best 22 or whatnot. But yeah, I think Ashcroft provides value when he plays. With regards to he's going to play early, he's going to get possessions. I could see him doing quite nicely. What are your thoughts on the forward line, Nathan, and how do you see that flex position kind of filling out for next year?
Yeah, well, I guess this goes against SuperCoach convention, the forward line, given that when I was having a look at the prices myself, it is quite grim reading, especially at the higher end. So you've got Jason Horne-Francis, and then the only other player who I think I would comfortably pick between McRae's price, which is $392, and Horne-Francis's price of $537 is Dylan Moore at $526. And then, the next player I had was Jack McRae as well. I just don't think there's anyone in the forward line who is standing out as pick me other than those top 2 forwards. And even then, they've got their questions over them. So, forward line, I think if you are going to go mid-price madness, it is definitely in the forward line. And I feel like, the forward line has sort of become what the back line used to be, in which the back line used to sort of be where you would go to mid-price madness to try and, compensate other positions of the ground. But now that's sort of flipped around on its head a bit with the forward line sort of becoming more of that type thing. So, so I myself have got Horn, Francis, McRae and Bailey Smith in there as well, because I just don't think there's anyone else above 392,000, which is what McRae's priced at, who is worth picking. Dylan Moore, I have had him. He probably might get squeezed out in the end. Rankin, I talked about last episode. I think 521, he will definitely be cheaper at some stage. Luke Jackson gets impacted by Sean Darcy returning. Jesse Hogan needs to obviously kick 80 goals again to be at that price point. I don't know if that's going to happen. Brent Daniels is he's a bit of an interesting one because he can play in the midfield. But again, if he gets stuck in the forward line, that scoring's not going to go well. And then you've got Mackay and Jeremy Cameron. Jeremy Cameron's one. I've always been a big fan of Jeremy Cameron's. I think he probably is the closest thing to Lance Franklin from a super coach perspective, in that he's a key forward who doesn't necessarily play like a key forward. So he's probably a lot more consistent than the other key forwards in that sense, in that he can get up the ground a bit more. He's got an elite kick as well on him. So if you are going to go to key forward, I would definitely recommend Jeremy Cameron. And then he doesn't mind putting in a 180 when they play against some rubbish side down at GMHBA either. So he could be like a F6 come the end of the year. But you can probably get him at a cheaper price than that. And then you're sort of in like Josh Tracy, Waterman, Curnow, Baker, Myers, Keys, Mason Wood. And then, the only other one who I did look at was Toby Green, who I think had a bit of a down year last year. I think he is underpriced at 426,000.
Yeah.
But I guess there's that other problem too, in that realistically, what's he going to get to and what's he going to average? I just think that perhaps that might end up being where he's at. Cam Rayner's one who's always been, I guess, a bit of a smoky player. And his prelim final, he basically won Brisbane that prelim final and then took that huge mark in the grand final. Shea Bolton at a new club, and then you're basically down to Jack McRae. So I don't think there's anyone in that range who I could comfortably pick other than Jeremy Cameron, who I think is probably overpriced. You can get him cheaper. Rankin, who I think is overpriced. And who's the other? And Toby Green, who I don't know what his role's going to be or what his output's going to be. So, realistically, I think McRae and Smith probably are going to be most F2s and F3s. And then it's just a matter of, trying to fit the rest in. Mateus Phillip, who don't mind the pick, there's not really a lot around his price. And then, you're basically down into the rookies. I think Caleb Daniel is a must-have as well. I've got him myself. I think if you can pick up any DPP player who plays as a backline player, especially in the forward line, and him and McRae, I think were both squeezed out of that Western Bulldogs side, and we've seen how important stability is to any side, and I think that they were really unstable, that Dogs lineup. So I think with a bit of consistency from McRae and Caleb Daniel, I can really see them getting themselves right back up, into the upper echelon, and especially now that they're forward eligible. I think they basically pick themselves, and then you're basically down into the rookies again. So I think the forward line again is going to be the hardest position to pick. I mean, in my first side, I will just say this on camera as well. In my first side, I had Tom Lynch and Sam Powell-Pepper in there, who are both coming off long-term injuries, because there is literally no one else who I knew would probably get a guaranteed game. and could actually score well. And Tom Lynch is probably the biggest walking hospital in the AFL right now.
Yeah.
And he was in my starting lineup, so that's sort of how grim it is in the forward line, I think. So yeah, I'd be interested to see that. And then the flex player, I actually had Bailey Smith as the flex player.
Yeah.
I feel like the way the flex is going to work is I feel like come the end of the year, I feel like a lot of people are going to have the third ruckman in that role. Just because I think out of all of the positions, I think they're probably the least impacted with tags and scoring and whatnot. So perhaps if there is, say, like you haven't picked Max Gawn and he, drops 50 or 100K, there is that possibility of perhaps bringing him in as the flex player. And like in Thomas's case, moving Ashcroft up into the midfield and then bringing Gawn in as that flex player. And then you've essentially got 3 premium ruckmen, which I think is probably the way by the end of the year most sides will look. I don't think come the end of the year you would want a rookie or I don't think by the end of the year you want a rookie in that spot. But perhaps the other thing that the flex position might allow for is to take an extra risk with someone, say like a Bailey Smith coming back from injury or a Kitty Coleman, in that if they do, break down early on in the game, their score's probably not going to get impacted because it's still only a best 22 scoring system. So there is always that, I suppose, with picking those guys. But yeah, I feel like come the end of the year, I feel like that flex position will either be a third ruckman or like a mid-pricer who, I remember probably going back 10 years ago, but Lockie Hunter sort of broke out about midway through the years. It's sort of a high 300K price player. And by the end of the year, I think he was like a top 6 forward by the end of the year. I feel like that's probably going to be the only realistic path for the flex position. I think if you've got 8 midfielders, that's probably enough. You've got your 6 defenders, you've got hopefully 6 forwards who are reliable. That's probably enough. So yeah, it probably leaves the flex as either that extra premium in the ruck or a mid-pricer who's really in form to take that flex role. So yeah, I think the flex role will change a lot of things and how players play the game. But I guess if you can always I guess if you can always have an extra score in there and it sort of counteracts someone getting concussed in the first minute of a game, well, I think I'm all for that. So it will change the game, but hopefully it will change the game for the better, and allow players to bring in another high-priced player, which will hopefully improve scoring even more, as opposed to previous years.
Yeah, no, 100% agree. I think it'll be even more interesting in early days with how players decide to play the game. Look, by the end of the season, you'd be pretty confident that most players still playing SuperCoach will have a premium in that flex position, so it doesn't really matter how you go about it. But yeah, early days, if you do, I've seen Matty Flynn as a discounted ruck who's pretty much guaranteed a first ruck spot when fit playing there, who could score quite nicely, who's in my considerations. Just quickly before we wrap it up for this year, you look at the forward line, as Nathan said, there's not many top premiums. A lot of them have finished off the year quite strongly, which obviously means their price is going to be escalated for next season. Isaac Rankin was on a house on fire before he got injured, which is half the reason why he was so expensive to start with. Dylan Moore obviously had a really positive back end of the season, which also helped pretty much from round 12 to 24, only dropped below 100 5 times from what I can see here. Isaac Rankin similarly had that real good patch in the middle from round 5 to round 17, where he missed 4 games through suspension, or suspension and injury throughout the season. But between those that round where he did play, he only dropped below 100 4 times and scored. The rest of them are above 110. So, yeah, real positive scorer there. But I think Rankin's the one that, look, if Adelaide had less midfielders coming into the side with regards to like Sid Draper, James Peatling coming into the side, then yes, I'd be more inclined to go that way. But I think with particularly those two players coming in, I could see Rankin playing more of a traditional forward. And as soon as he does that, his score gets impacted quite heavily. And Dylan Moore was one that I toyed up a lot last season and never actually brought in. I think Jonas, who unfortunately can't be with us this year or moving forward at the moment, he had him in his side as well and was quite, duly rewarded with his ability to play midfield and forward and score quite nicely. But Moore is also one that can drop into the 400s as well. And I think that's the main thing that you've got to understand with these premium forwards. They all look nice on paper when you've got, say, 2 or 3 premiums in the forward line. But as soon as they drop in price, that's a problem. Like you look at the, 4th ranked forward there was Luke Jackson, who was a pain in the ass to deal with for the majority of the season with his fluctuating scores. And they don't score like midfielders is what we're trying to say. So they're not going to be consistently scoring your hundreds. They're going to obviously produce those stinkers. And you look at the likes of McRae, Smith, and, Philippou and Caleb Daniel in particular, and you tell me that they could potentially match their output or better, you definitely take the cheaper prices in that regards in a kind of forward specific role. But before we wrap it up quickly, I just want to bring our attention towards the early buys because we've had a few questions with regards to that. Let me just do this and bring up this slide here. So this is obviously the early buys here. I've just compiled 1 or 2 names that you've just got to be aware of if you are picking your sides. That just aware, especially that round 3 buy with the Lions, Pies, Cats and Swans all at once. So from the Suns, you've got Lombard or Leo Lombard, the rookie, and Sam Flanders. Round 2, so having that very early buy, you've got to cover. Round 2 as well, you've got Whitfield and Green. I don't think many will have a double up of Flanders, Whitfield, Green combination that early, but you're probably going to have one of them. So just be wary of that very early buy. Round 3, this is where it gets quite dicey. Ashcroft or both Ashcrofts, if you decide to go that route. Lockie Neal, Dan Houston, Harry Perryman, Bailey Smith, Max Holmes, Goulden, Heaney all share that round 3 buy. So please do not stack up on those. Rookies is probably our recommendation. Out the premiums early because you're going to have to cover them at some point. And whilst it looks nice, moving forward, they have that early buy for a reason because they play opening round. And whilst your opening round score might look nice, I mean, it's going to cost you big time come round 3 when there's heavy premiums knocked out the door and probably your rookies are not quite there to replace them. And then round 4 is not as substantial, but Hawks and Essendon. So Day, Sicily, Martin and Merritt. Again, you might have a Sicily, Merritt, Martin combination. A lot of people have played with those players in their team in the past. So, yeah, just be wary of those early buys because, look, it's one thing to kind of plan for the mid-season buys, but those early buys can really hurt if you've gone too hard too early with some of those early buy players. I guess, if you have them early, you can kind of see how they go round 0 and then play accordingly. Because I believe last year they didn't count the round 0 scores in the overall kind of thing. It just gave you another opportunity to see how those round 0 buys played. So stacking up early doesn't necessarily mean good things if you have a Brisbane and Collingwood double up for sure. But that's all we got time for today. Hopefully you got a bit out of my team and obviously Nathan's thoughts on his side and how that differs and the similarities there. Obviously, it'll be good to look back on. Now we've done 2 team renditions, so by the time preseason comes around, late January, early February, it'd be nice to see the comparisons with what we've had to start with, and that's when it will really heat up. And with regard to knowing exactly who's who and who's lighting the house on fire. But other than that, have a wonderful Christmas and a safe start to 2025, and we'll be back come the preseason day. January.
Have a safe Christmas, everyone.